Welcome to another edition of The Explainer. Pull up a chair and get comfortable, because today we are stepping way back in time to the 1800s in the American Southwest. I'm going to share a gripping true story with you. It's this incredibly intense tale of land, power, rebellion, and one man who stood right dead center in the middle of it all. We're looking at the life of Pablo Herrera. He was a figure who was, all at once, a vigilante, a labor organizer, a politician, and ultimately, a tragic martyr. His story gets largely overlooked by mainstream history, but honestly, it is absolutely essential if you want to understand the struggle for civil rights and land in New Mexico.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really get Pablo Herrera, we have to look at where he lived, San Miguel County in 1895, with our story centering right around Las Vegas, New Mexico. Now, following the Mexican-American War and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, this whole territory was acquired by the United States. But this wasn't some empty frontier, right? It was home to deeply established Hispanic communities that relied on traditional communal systems for using the land. So by the late 19th century, this region was undergoing massive, incredibly turbulent changes. The old ways were colliding head-on with an aggressively expanding American commercial empire, and the local people were caught right in the crossfire.
I want to start off by having you listen to this quote. "There is more honesty in the halls of the Territorial prison than in the halls of the legislature." Pablo Herrera spoke those exact words in 1891. Just let that sink in for a second. That is not just a clever soundbite. It's a raw, deeply cynical, and disillusioned indictment of the American political system of his time. It tells us that Herrera wasn't just some impulsive man of action, he was a really complex thinker who thoroughly understood the mechanics of power and corruption. So you have to ask, what pushed a guy from a prominent local family to make such a drastic statement?
Part 1. The threat to Las Vegas. To figure out what pushed him to that breaking point, we first need to understand the severe historical context that forced Pablo Herrera into a life of resistance.
The absolute flashpoint of this conflict was the town of Las Vegas land grant. This was originally distributed by Mexico back in the 1830s to subsistence settlers, and we're talking about a massive tract of land here, over 500,000 acres. Crucially, the bulk of this land was legally reserved as a commons for collective use. Generations of local families relied on this shared space for grazing their livestock, hunting, and collecting firewood. It was quite literally the backbone of their survival. But when the U.S. took over, federal land administrators and wealthy investors pushed a system that heavily favored private property. Suddenly, this communal land grant was treated as a prime target for really aggressive commercial privatization.
And the engines driving this inclusion were rapid and relentless. In 1879, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad arrived, linking Las Vegas to international markets. And with the railroad came wealthy speculators, many tied to a notoriously corrupt political cabal known as the Santa Fe Ring, along with giant commercial cattle ranchers. And they brought with them a devastating new technology, barbed wire. Seemingly overnight, ranchers from the East Coast and Europe were illegally fencing off tens of thousands of acres of the commons. They essentially cut off the local people's access to vital water and grazing lands, squeezing these subsistence farmers right out of their livelihoods and forcing them into low-wage industrial labor.
Part 2. Rise of Las Gorras Blancas. The legal system had entirely failed the local Hispanic homesteaders. The courts consistently sided with the wealthy land grabbers. And that is exactly when Pablo Herrera, who was born in 1843, decided he had to fight back, teaming up with his brothers Juan Jose and Nicanor.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer, undeniable scale of their direct action. In early 1889, Pablo and his brothers formed Las Gorras Blancas, better known as the Whitecaps, and they didn't bother playing nice with the courts anymore. Under Pablo's direct leadership, they launched masked, night-riding operations. They went out and literally cut hundreds of miles of barbed wire, forcefully returning the enclosed land to the commons. When the railroad companies started clear-cutting the old-growth forests, the Whitecaps burned thousands of railroad ties to totally halt the timber transport. They destroyed commercial ranching equipment and even went so far as to set fire to the properties of territorial officials who were colluding with the speculators.
But looking at their official proclamation, which was published in March 1890, it reveals that this was definitely not just random vandalism. They explicitly declared, "Our purpose is to protect the rights of the people in general, and especially those of the helpless classes." Las Gorras Blancas was a highly organized movement built on a really clear ideological foundation. They framed their struggle entirely around class solidarity. They demanded fair elections, pushed back against exploitative lawyers, and firmly positioned themselves as the grassroots defenders of the poor against an encroaching capitalist monopoly.
Part 3. Labor Organizing and Politics. Well, Pablo quickly realized that simply snipping fences in the dark wasn't going to be enough to permanently stop these wealthy syndicates. And this realization led to a massive, frankly brilliant, strategic shift in his fight for justice.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because his evolution during this brief period is just incredible. In 1889, he's a masked vigilante leading Las Gorras Blancas. Skip to early 1890, and he and his brothers are organizing the Hispanic working class through the Knights of Labor Union. They grew it from 3 measly chapters to over 20. And then, by late 1890, Pablo fully transitions into formal electoral politics. He leverages his massive popularity and actually gets himself elected to the New Mexico Territorial Legislature. But, spoiler alert, by February 1891, he resigns in absolute disgust.
To actually get into that legislature in the first place, he brought his fight straight from the midnight pastures right into the formal halls of government. He ran under the banner of El Partido del Pueblo Unido, or the United People's Party. This was a really potent populist coalition that united reformists, union activists, and land-grant heirs. By winning political office, Pablo proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the resistance wasn't just some fringe group of malcontents. It was a vast, hugely popular movement that had the sheer numbers to literally vote their way into territorial power.
Part 4. The Reluctant Legislator. Winning the election and actually changing the system, however, proved to be 2 entirely different beasts. Pablo's time as a politician was brief and just deeply, deeply disappointing to him. He arrived at the legislature only to find that the entire system was fundamentally rigged. The territorial government was essentially acting as a country club for the exact same commercial ranchers, lawyers, and land grabbers he had been battling back in San Miguel County. No meaningful reform was ever going to happen in those rooms. So after just one single legislative session, he delivered that famous, blistering quote comparing the legislature to a prison, and he just walked out. He returned to Las Vegas to reorganize his grassroots labor efforts. But the tragic irony is, by doing so, he made himself a massive, highly visible target for the establishment.
Part 5. A Tragic Christmas Eve. And this brings us to the climax of our story, taking place a few years later, in late 1894. It is a moment of profound tragedy that still echoes through the history of New Mexico today.
Let me set the scene for you here. Pablo Herrera was, at this point, technically a fugitive. Back in 1891, he had escaped from the county jail after being convicted of the murder of a man named Florencio Sandoval during a riot, which was an act many locals actually believed was done purely in self-defense. So for years, Pablo just lived quietly about 9 miles outside of town. The local law hadn't even bothered him. He frequently visited friends in Las Vegas without a single issue. But as 1894 was drawing to a close, Pablo decided he finally wanted to clear his name. He planned to surrender to the newly incoming sheriff and formally submit his case to the courts once more.
Look at the deeply humanizing, incredibly specific details of his final morning, which were later reported by the local newspaper, La Voz del Pueblo. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve. Pablo arrived in Las Vegas early that morning. First, he went to the priest house for confession and to take communion. Then, he visited a few local stores and pharmacies, buying little Christmas gifts to distribute to the poor children in his old neighborhood. Finally, he went to grab breakfast with his friend Caterino Romero. It was a completely peaceful, completely normal morning. But a local informant had run to the district judge, claiming the dangerous bandit was in town. And the judge, abruptly and aggressively, ordered the sheriffs to take Herrera alive or dead.
So, the crucial point is the stark, truly horrifying contrast between the 2 narratives of what happened next. The official establishment story claimed Pablo was an armed, dangerous bandit who wildly fired upon the deputies, forcing them to shoot back. But the accounts of multiple local eyewitnesses, everyday people who were standing mere feet away, tell a completely different story. They testified that Pablo was actually walking away slowly, making absolutely no attempt to draw a weapon or defend himself when the deputies suddenly opened fire.
The deputies tasked with executing this alive or dead order were Felipe Lopez, Porfirio Casas, and a guy named Billy Green. When Pablo tried to leave his friend's house just to avoid any confrontation, the deputies spread out and totally surrounded him in what can only be described as a chaotic ambush.
An eyewitness named Estefana Baca, who was standing right there on the sidewalk, literally pleaded with the deputies not to shoot. She begged them, pointing out that innocent children were playing nearby and noting that Pablo was turned away and offering absolutely no resistance. The deputies completely ignored her.
The end was incredibly raw and brutal. According to the coroner's jury, Deputy Felipe Lopez fired 2 fatal shots directly into Pablo Herrera's back. Pablo fell to the ground, mortally wounded. And then, in a final act of just shocking audacity, Deputy Billy Green walked right up to the dying man and fired a point-blank shot directly into Pablo's face, leaving powder burns on his cheek. The deputies naturally claimed self-defense, but the eyewitnesses were adamant. Pablo never even looked at Lopez, let alone fired at him. Unsurprisingly, given the power dynamics of the time, the deputies were never prosecuted.
Pablo Herrera's tragic death in 1894 effectively broke the back of the organized resistance movement he started. But it leaves us with a profound, lingering historical question. Was Pablo Herrera a dangerous outlaw, just as the territorial elites in the official record claimed? Or was he an early, absolutely vital pioneer of civil rights resistance, a man who quite literally gave his life defending the communal lands and livelihoods of the marginalized Hispanic people of the American Southwest? I'll let you weigh the evidence for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the history you've been told.